Good afternoon. My name's Wendy Sukier, and I'm just going to give folks a couple of minutes to log on. So please bear with us. Thank you very much for joining today. As I said, my name's Wendy Sukier. I lead the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub and the Diversity Institute at Toronto Metropolitan University. And I want to welcome you to our Ethical Digital Showcase today, along with our panel, Marielle Voxep, Vivella Rydell-Anders, and Danielle Graham. And we may also be joined by Neal Dempsey later in the program. So before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Mississauga of Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples. And many of you know that the university is in a process of truth and reconciliation, and hence the name change to Toronto Metropolitan University. The work that we do at the Diversity Institute is infused with a commitment to truth and reconciliation, and that includes all of the work we do in supporting entrepreneurs and particularly women entrepreneurs. So today's conversation is particularly apt. It's no surprise to folks on this call that women continue to be underrepresented in the venture capital industry. And we're very pleased that Ethical Digital initiated this program along with the National Angel Capital Association and Bay Partners to really dig in a bit on the facts and the research and the perspectives. And really what we're doing today is we're going to explore dimensions of the research paper that was produced called Women in the Venture Capital Industry in Canada and the United States. I will provide a bit of a highlight, and then we will dive into the panel to talk more about the perspectives on these issues from practitioners. So let me start by sharing my screen. I feel like someone should be playing the music from Jeopardy as I fumble around, but let's see. There. Can everybody see the screen? Can I get a thumbs up from someone? Can't see it? Okay. How's that? Perfect. Thank you so much. And I will just hide a few things. So there we go. So having already taken 2 of my minutes setting up, I will try to be brief. I'm just going to provide a bit of an introduction to the project with an industry overview, how we structured the study, and what we found. And the only couple of things I wanted to say about the Diversity Institute: we are the lead for the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, as well as a number of other programs. And the key point is that we're based in the Ted Rogers School of Management. So our orientation to issues around equity, diversity, and inclusion is firmly grounded in the belief that organizations that do a good job on equity, diversity, and inclusion will do a better job overall. And so when we look at the VC industry, it's clear that it contributes considerably to both the Canadian and US economies, although Canada is definitely lagging behind. We also know that there is some research that suggests that companies generally, and VC firms in particular, that have more women in leadership positions tend to perform better. And we also have research that suggests that greater representation of women in venture capital leads to more funding for ventures led by women and racialized people, and that women investors are more likely to bring women entrepreneurs along. And that, one of the cases I like to reference is a case where a woman pitched a new product idea and to predominantly male investors, and they said, no, no, no. The product was pantyhose that do not run, and the company was SheerTex, which now has become a runaway success. So very often having gendered perspectives at the table really does make a difference in the kinds of investments that are made. And so the study was really aimed at looking at the current state of representation in the VC industry in Canada and the US based on the data that was available, interviewing people to talk about what they saw as the barriers, both in terms of those seeking venture capital and those providing venture capital, and then looking at strategies that had been used to increase women's participation. So there has been a growing amount of research that shows that women are gaining ground in founding companies that work in the space. And women-founded companies are now almost a quarter of all VC deals, depending on how you define women founders. The number of general partners is increasing slowly, and we see representation in Silicon Valley also increasing. And there are lots of studies showing that women are gaining ground, but the sector is not particularly diverse. And in fact, white women have considerably more sway than others, despite growing diversity in the populations. When you look at the deal flow and you look at investments, and here we have to be sure that we differentiate between startups that have a woman founder versus majority owned women businesses. Those are two different things, but we're seeing growing investments in startups led by women. We're seeing also women in Canada now own 20% of businesses. So the number of women-led and women-owned businesses is significantly increasing. And there's lots of stats and data in the report you can all read. So we'll let you dig into that in more detail. If you look at the trends, it does seem that over the last decade or so, there has been an increase, but we have seen amid the economic downturn that women-founded companies tend to get less capital than those owned by men. And when we look at both the research and the interviews, we still see many reports of unfair bias. All of you know about the research that has shown that identical pitches delivered by a man, delivered by a woman, produce different results. Men are often asked questions about their potential. Women are often asked questions about their track record. Women are less likely to be funded and likely to receive less money. And that's been a pattern that has been documented in considerably more research. The other research suggests that women sometimes do not get as good deals as men counterparts, giving up more equity, for example, in order to attract investments. And we can talk more about that phenomena in the discussions. We also see that women-owned businesses tend to be smaller. They tend to be more often in services industries, and they tend to be underfinanced. And often because of their experiences with bias, women become discouraged borrowers so that they don't even try attract investments because they expect to be turned down. And so what we did for this particular study, it was small, but it was in depth. There were 15 senior leaders in the US and Canada, and we had long interviews with them. We recorded the interviews and then we pulled out some of the themes. And so we would bucket the issues at sort of three levels. At the societal level, there are barriers in terms of lack of knowledge and awareness about the industry, limited networks. There are even regulatory issues that present barriers to women. The culture is predominantly composed of white men, and many women don't feel valued, safe, or included. And the low representation of women in the industry is notable by many who work there. And many women talked about being the only at the table, the only in their firm, and the impact that has on their experience. And we also see that there are intersectional issues with other groups being very underrepresented in the industry. And we've, as I mentioned, done a deep dive, especially into Indigenous communities, and Indigenous women face additional barriers. When we look at the organizations themselves, and here we're referring to policies, practices, procedures, what we see is there's a lack of focus on diversity and inclusion in the VC firms. And very often this is a function of priorities, this is a function of culture, this is a function of not understanding what we would term as, quote, the business case, and also the fact that often the established networks are comprised of people who are similar to each other. And there's, really good research that shows that we tend to, birds of a feather flock together is the expression. The technical term for that is homophilia, which is we prefer people who are like us. And that has huge implications in this particular industry because of the importance of networks and personal connections. And again, the issue is not just the exclusion of women, it's also racial diversity, it's also excluding Indigenous peoples and so on. And the other thing that is worth noting is the issues are not just getting people into firms, it's keeping them there. And we see this in a lot of industries and sectors where women are underrepresented. You can get them in, you can get them at the table. They don't feel valued, they don't feel included, and they leave as fast as they came. So retention is a really, really important issue. Other issues that were flagged were support for career advancement, expectations, the notion that women were being held to higher standards, and a lack of awareness, as I said at the outset, why equity, diversity, and inclusion is important, why it's not just about being politically correct or an add-on or checking boxes, why it actually is important to finding the best deals and growing the best businesses. Issues around parental leave. There are certainly big differences between Canada and the US in terms of the norms here, but many women talked about being overlooked or forgotten when they went on parental leave. And while men increasingly are going on parental leave, it's usually regarded as a heroic gesture as opposed to a necessity, and that has a real impact. And the other thing is just awareness of bias and microaggressions and what you should and should not do and say to make people feel included. When we dug down to the individual level, and here we're talking about individuals, knowledge, behaviors, choices, one of the issues that was flagged was educational requirements and the fact that women tend to be underrepresented in some of the source disciplines, whether we're talking about technology, whether we're talking about finance, and that has some impact on access and acceptance. Lack of mentoring and sponsorship and support by other leaders, the fact that folks felt they were not as plugged into networks and often excluded from, for example, social events that might produce professional opportunities, and this notion of being held to a higher standard, that even when women do have the skills required, they will not be as successful as men with similar levels of skills because of changed expectations. So when we think about what are some of the things that need to happen and to drive change in the industry, certainly expectations around monitoring and tracking are really important. In some countries like the UK, for example, encourage, it's a code, it's not legislation, but encourage both VCs and angel investors, as well as financial institutions, to actually report on the demographics of their deals, the size and demographics of who they're funding. And that kind of reporting and transparency produces real results. They also require reporting on the composition of firms. And so, we believe what gets measured gets done, and a move towards more monitoring and tracking is really important, both in terms of team diversity as well as investments. Mentoring, networking, absolutely critical, and those things were identified over and over again. Commitments from management, making sure that the tone at the top reinforces the importance of diversity and inclusion and support for women. Having inclusive practices, and we've done a lot of research on, how to reduce bias in hiring and promotions, and then constantly building a culture of inclusion. And, Drucker said culture eats strategy, but it's really hard. It's one of the hardest things to wrap your head around. When we talk about societal level, challenging the stereotypes, supporting images of successful VCs and startups led by women, very, very important. Thinking about government regulations and the unintended consequences they have on women's participation, including how you can use or not use various tax incentives, and how entry-level requirements can present barriers. Thinking about best practices in terms of government programs and legislation. And in Canada, we have obviously a different regulatory system than they do in the United States, but these are all things that have to be considered. At the organizational level, we set targets for sales, we set targets for returns on investment, we have to set targets for equity, diversity, and inclusion, and we have to implement programs and policies to really operationalize this. It's not just about window dressing, it's about actually setting targets and monitoring progress. And then we've got a whole set of best practices on everything from language you use in job postings to how you mentor high potential women. Training is critically important. We need to build capacity in women and their understanding of where the opportunities are, the skills, and so on. And of course, those investments are important. But if you don't invest in attacking the root causes of bias and discrimination in the system and offering incentives for change, you're basically just contributing to the problem. So lots of recommendations for what can happen at the government level in terms of programs and policies, best practices at the organizational level to build the pipeline or pathways into the VC industry, and then lots that can be done in order to change the behavior of people who have a direct influence over the sector. So we really wanted to highlight at a general level the research, because often people feel it's them, it's their problem, it's they feel like they're not being taken seriously or they're not being heard. But when you see the research, when you see the overall trends, when you understand that there are systemic issues that have to be addressed, hopefully it will help us all pull together. Thank you so much. And now what I would like to do is move on to talk to our panel. And hopefully I have stopped screen sharing. Yes, I have. I would also encourage folks to put questions in the chat, comments in the chat, and the Q&A as we go along. But I'd like to get started by first providing a little more detail on who our panel is. So first of all, we have Marielle, who leads NACO's experiential learning strategy and the National Women's Initiative, which is supporting a national network of partner organizations to provide support and education to women entrepreneurs and investors across Canada. She's also a coach and a mentor and managing director at the Narwhal Project. I love that, narwhals as opposed to unicorns. And she's helped many startups with their growth. And I'll let her talk more about what she does. Our second panelist is Viveka, who is the CEO of Pacific Vision Foundation out of San Francisco. And she's an advisor to Dia Venture Studios, a Swedish femtech incubator. She's also president of Healthcare Informatics Management Systems Society, Northern California chapter. And she has had lots of roles as largely in digital healthcare. Then we have Daniel Graham, who is the general partner of Phoenix Fire and co-founder of the Firehood, which is an angel stage fund and network focused on women in technology. She created Fierce Founders programs, the first women-focused accelerator and boot camp series in Canada, and previously managed Ontario Centres of Innovation Market Readiness Fund. She's a principal at Sandpiper Ventures, which I love, as well as consultant. So she's got a very extensive career as well. And I'd like to pause there now and turn it over to the panelists. So first of all, can you in your own words describe, what your role is and what you think is important about the subject we're digging into today? And I wonder if maybe, Marielle, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Wendy. I have to give credit to Charles Plant for coining the term narwhal. He is a good friend and mentor of mine, and he came up with that term through some of his research at the University of Toronto, which is really interesting on why Canada is falling behind on scaling companies. So beyond my role at the National Angel Capital Organization, which Wendy described really well, I have a personal interest in this subject because I have spent over a decade working with entrepreneurs, and in my experience, I have invested in female-founded companies. I have raised money with female founders, and a lot of the barriers that we've discussed today were apparent firsthand. And I think that there is work that we need to do. It's great that we have more awareness on this subject, but awareness is just the first step. I think what we really need to do now is start seeing some of these solutions in practice. And there's some good news in our National Angel Capital organization report. The findings were just published at the end of last year. We have seen the presence of female angel investors increase to about 37%. So it's risen by 10% over the last 5 years, which is it's slow progress, but it is progress and it's moving in the right direction. And angel investing is at the early stage. And so we're hoping that that has a positive downstream effect in venture capital.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Viveka, how about you?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. I'm very excited about this. I came from it first from the kind of social impact and fundraising in the nonprofit and NGO world. It was really apparent that there wasn't enough female and female women of color, not enough that representation. And then when I went to Stanford to get a master's degree in clinical informatics and working more with a couple of different startups and raising money, I also realized we're just also on this trajectory where it's much harder to raise money when you're talking about when you have female funders. They might not be trusted in the same way. They might not have the same voice network. And then if they start talking about issues about the female body and femtech, there might be the kind of ickiness factor. And it's not a niche market. And this is why I'm involved with Dia Ventures in Sweden and in the Nordics, basically supporting women who are solving problems for, more than half of the population. So yes, all the things that the report are saying, and this is why I'm involved with allyship, is so important to us to bring in more women of color, unrepresented people, to be leaders, for us to support everybody, to come with their ideas and different perspectives. And guess what? It's going to also make for better businesses and for profit. So I'm very passionate about it and happy to be here today. Thanks.
And I'm going to cycle back because I think your point about femtech is so interesting and something that people often overlook. And given that women make most of the purchasing decisions and are more than half the population, the fact that lots of opportunities there are overlooked because of what you described as the ick factor is so interesting. And I haven't heard anybody put it quite that way before, but super important to recognize. And so Danielle, please jump in and give us your perspective.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm a general partner of an all-women fund in Waterloo, Phoenix Fire. All of the general partners are women. All of the LPs are women, and we focus on women-led startups. But for me, it really began while I was working in international development in Eastern Africa on women's microloans. And I saw the impact of not only entrepreneurship, but women-specific community development. And so when I was in Waterloo and building out Fierce Founders, that was part of my philosophy, that it would be beneficial to have a women-specific program. And I'll add a quick anecdote that at the time when I was researching what existed, all I could find was a stiletto pitch, which was pink and had a large stiletto as the logo. And so thinking back a decade ago to what was and now what is in terms of all the programs and initiatives, I think it's great to see a report like this and the impact that we've been able to have.
So interesting. And I'm so, I know we're focusing on VCs and that kind of conjures up a particular orientation, but I share your passion for looking at microfinancing as well, because we know more than half of businesses in Canada start with less than $5,000, and yet trying to get $5,000 is often near impossible. And I can tell you examples of 700 Black women entrepreneurs applying for a chance at $80,000 divided by 8. Like the appetite and the need and the gap in terms of even access for that very small amount of money that will often make a difference between someone having a business or not is almost insurmountable in Canada. And I often say it's easier to get microfinancing in Bangladesh than it is here. So thank you for Thank you for raising that. And in your opening remarks, you've all talked a little bit about what you see as barriers, but I wonder if you can think about some of the generic stuff that we talked about, and maybe give us some specific examples that you've observed, and then we'll talk about some of the strategies to counter them. And Viveka, maybe you can start off and really dig in a little more on that ick factor and femtech and how we're missing huge opportunities.
Well, I think the opportunities is in education, right? And making sure that we're at all the conferences and we're all the rooms, and we keep telling the stories about these are your mothers, these are your grandparents, these are your grandmother, your sister, your daughter, and that you want to create a better life for them. And a lot of times they just haven't thought about it. And so it's a lot of education. And so that's one piece. Just we have to be visible. And if there's not room at the table, we have to make our own table. And I think this is what organizations like this and other organizations bringing more women to, and more microfinancing to women and more VC capital, that's what we're doing. But then we also have to measure and say, well, how are we actually doing? And if there's a step back, we have to double up and bring more people in. And so I think it's very concrete that if you don't monitor it and you don't track it and you don't set goals, then there's a lot of talking about it rather than progress. So that's what I want to comment on that.
Okay, super. Marielle, sorry.
It's okay, Wendy. I absolutely agree with education and also with measuring, but having targets, and not just talking about policies and procedures, but having meaningful targets and holding ourselves accountable to them. This is a slightly more subtle thing that I see, but I had a really good conversation with a very prominent female angel investor, and she said that something that they do in their program is they're aware of these small things like networking events taking place in the evenings. Well, the reality is, whether we want it to be or not, that most women who are mothers have to go pick up their kids. And so that's a barrier for them. Then they can't attend these networking events, and networking is so important when you're raising money. And then there are things like VC socials being golf days or poker nights. And I love both of those. I am a big poker player and I love golf, but we just need to have more, just like more diversity and think bigger than that. Like, these are simple things. These are really actually achievable things that we could be looking at that do act as barriers.
Really, really good point. And Danielle, how about you?
Yeah, I would say it's there's a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach. And so I've seen a lot of the grassroots activities that have taken place that have made real change, especially when it comes to kind of younger women in venture capital. So even from my work with Laurier, where I did my MBA, there's a program specific to venture capital where we were able to build out the memo and then analyze a company and actually invest. So increasing the number of women who were in that program at the same time as we were gathering as early stage VCs in our career for dinners. So a group of us were meeting about 6 years ago. There'd be about 12, then 20. Now there's 300, and it's called the Canadian Women in Venture Capital Group. And so to see that go from dinners where we're inviting the women students from these classes to meet us as well, to now they all have careers in the field and they were able to help each other. So there wasn't a specific funding mechanism that enabled that as much as our own initiative to support each other and continue to build. And so seeing that kind of evolve and different programs that we're able to deliver to each other. And 2 weeks ago, I was at the Canadian Venture Capital Association's Ivy program for women in VC, where 25 young women were all learning about venture capital through this 1-week program. And the level of talent and skill and ongoing support that we can offer those individuals, especially now that they've not only been identified, but also self-identified as interested in the field, makes it really tactical and practical to keep supporting them.
So you've talked a lot about the need to support women and opportunities around networking and so on. Wondering if we can dig in a bit on opportunities for structural changes. And I don't know if any of you have particular views on things like the, investing in women code, for instance, or platforms that may, Lava Life seems to be working, not for me, but for others in terms of matchmaking. I'm kind of mystified as to why we are still so dependent on kind of random, you go to a networking event tonight and you miss the one tomorrow and your perfect VC match was there. I'm wondering if anybody is aware of, innovative policies, innovative approaches, new technologies, tools, and things that you have seen that you think have potential to create dramatic change. Because I appreciate everything you're talking about, sort of incremental change and building momentum and networking and so on. But I wonder if there are any other things that we should be getting behind and sort of listing as priorities.
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I think there are initiatives. I'll say here in California, we have How Women Lead and How Women Invest, and then we also have the Alice Network, which currently is bound up in some legal shenanigans because of microloans that they provided for women of color. I think these are all efforts, but again, these are projects. These are not system-wide. And I think anything more, if you talk more on the legislative or on the policy side, you're right, that has to be make sure that the money is actually getting to people who are underrepresented and more women. I think in the ecosystems where I've seen it be more successful is academia can be kind of its own insular. So I think Stanford, of course, Silicon Valley and Stanford has really great programs for getting people involved. But I think also some of these older organizations, so for example, the Healthcare Informatics Management System Society that I'm the president for the Northern California chapter, traditionally that was the IT group in healthcare organizations. So a pretty white men kind of sitting in the IT corner. Well, because of the pandemic and how we do provide care in a telehealth scenario and people understanding how important digital health and health solutions will be, and it's a passion of mine, I think in that sphere, we've made it much more possible for any young inventor in the area during the pandemic, to get on a Zoom call and on a virtual webinar and do their pitches, right? And so by inviting people in these areas that are not in the academic institution where people might not have an access point or can't afford, but to say in other arenas, we will help you. And this could also be on the county or the city level where you're saying, we're trying to find a solution to this traffic problem or this homeless problem or this other, like there's the big and sexy VC and kind of those big exits, or it's bringing more people in to pitch their ideas. And I think, frankly, I'm just very passionate about that. We're also talking to school kids to realize that there's a pathway to become, your ideas matter. We're not going to solve the big problems in the world if we don't bring your so it's kind of like you have to bring it to other rooms other than the venture capital room. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think about your other networks that you have. I'm going to say another one, which is the oral health. It's an health equity and access. Again, easy to get stuck in your own little clinic. But if you think about it, when we open up and we say, please, let's do a rapid fire round of you get to pitch your idea 3 minutes and we'll give you feedback on it. It makes people think of themselves in a different way. And so I think we have to do that at every level. And it can't just be in the rooms where the money is being handed out.
I think that's such an interesting perspective. And the other thing I love about your views on this is the boundaries between economic goals and objectives and social impact are clearly a continuum as opposed to a dichotomy. And I do think, without trying to overgeneralize, I do think there's good evidence to suggest both women-led ventures and women in venture capital are much more likely to think about social impact, environmental impact, community impact, as well as short-term returns. How about you, Marielle? What examples can you think of promising practices that might drive to large-scale change?
So something at the National Angel Capital Organization that we have seen is that unfortunately Canada has, because of our geography, we have these barriers where we have communities that just don't have access to the right networks. And so, as Vivica mentioned, taking pitches online during the pandemic did really help with exposure for entrepreneurs to access investors outside of their region, especially because a lot of investors, I'm going to speak specifically from the angel perspective, angel investors invest in what they know. And so if you have an entrepreneur on one side of Canada seeking investment in a very specialized industry, and they don't have access to those investors because the majority of investment we see taking place in central Canada, then geography has become a huge barrier for them. And so something that we are aware of and working on is trying to reduce these geographic barriers. So as part of NACO's National Women's Initiative, we launched projects with 30 partners across Canada, bringing together female entrepreneurs and female investors in roundtable settings, and also spotlighting a lot of these stories to bring awareness to those profiles, to hopefully raise their profiles so that they get the exposure that they need to get the interest from investors.
Thanks so much. That makes a lot of sense. And what about from your perspective, Danielle?
Yeah, I would say a lot of this work has been more formalized through these organizations like the CVCA, NACO, and Canadian Women in Venture Capital. So there's open applications. Overall, with venture capital, similar to entrepreneurship, a lot of it then becomes that kind of self-guided pathway. How do you get in? Where do you get in? It's a big question I get on panels quite often. And to everyone, there may be a unique story. Some people became an entrepreneur first and then had that operational experience to entice limited partners to invest in them. Others took more of the, MBA, consulting, or private equity to VC route as more of a financial analyst. And so thinking about what are all those different pathways, and not only which ways can we engage them, but which ways can we then actually actively recruit. And so that's where I've seen a lot of proactivity. For us at Phoenix Fire and the Firehood, a lot of the work that we're doing is very proactive at tech conferences, at incubators. As much as Canada is a large country, there is a smaller ecosystem and community. So we do travel across Canada as well. We went to every Atlantic province last year, Alberta, BC, across the prairies, hoping to get to the Yukon this year is a big plan. And so it's about being proactive, and the fact that these organizations exist, are getting well funded, specific to women's initiatives, and that capital is there. I think is what's making a difference, but that it needs to be, not just a goal to get to half. It's to get to everyone who's talented enough and interested enough to do this. We're not a number. And at the end of the day, with women entrepreneurs in particular, when you hear, okay, well, there's a woman on the team. So then if there's a woman on the team, then we want 100% of startups to have that. So what are our goals and where are we getting to and when are we done? I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and I hope we're never done this type of work.
So what is so striking to me about this conversation is so often when we talk about where there are barriers and where there are opportunities, the discussion is around government should do this, universities should do this, someone else should do this. And what's remarkable to me is all of you are saying, we should do this, we will do this, we are doing this, we're going to keep doing this, which is a really interesting indication of why you're successful. But if we were to, send a memo to the Minister of Small Business, what are the things that we want, or the Minister of Finance, what are the things we want government to keep doing or start doing that would help move us forward? And we'll talk about what should government do, what should post-secondary do, and what should entrepreneurs do if they want access to these great resources. So anyone want to dive in on what they want to see government do?
So I'm just going to add here, and again, I'm from Sweden, so I think of similarly like Canada, there's a lot more government than possibly that we have in the United States. Where I live in California, although California is trying to do a lot of things, our governor is pretty progressive that way. But I think so I believe very much that it's going to have to be community efforts and bringing in a entrepreneurial mindset in all the boring rooms as well. Like I think that's just we and our children and neighbors are going to be the people who are solving these problems because we're the closest to it. I want to say recently I'm trying to bring a mental health. She's a leader. She was 16 when she had a problem. I'm trying to bring her to Sweden, literally just so she can exchange ideas with other people. And I think those sometimes putting our money into just something as easy, as small, maybe as an airplane ride, but that and sending people to places and conferences where they can get inspired, just start something that I think is very important on the personal level. But your question was about what should government do? And I think on that is on the small business loan associations or all these to make sure that the forms are very easy to fill out. You don't need to have a master's degree to be able to fill out the paperwork. They have to be less of that bureaucratic speak. So make the forms easier to fill out for somebody with a 5th grade education or that level of reading. And then also make sure that it's in all the languages that is being spoken so that you're not leaving people out because they don't identify in a certain way, or they freak out if it's asked who's sponsoring you. Well, if you don't have that, right, it has to be those entry points. And I think what you could have a lot more is to say we will support you through your application process. And I think what I saw for sure in California during this time during the pandemic was that there was a lot more support by the government to help out with the small micro loans. And that support, and that has to continue. But again, it's how are we designing the forms? Are they inclusive? Are they easy to fill out? Are they not cumbersome? And this is not to say just give out free money and not try to measure it. You still have to measure it, but be careful about what you're asking about. That might be somebody will not even apply, right? Again, we know this when people apply to colleges, we know all these things. You need to make sure you're not asking them a question that's just going to stop them in the track and say, well, I don't have that. And so to just say, we're going to support you. And I think it's super important. And these are the access point, right? City colleges, people that have experience in different ways. People have good ideas and people have good lived experiences and those access points. I think government can play an important part in that, that they have to make it easier to access.
Such good ideas. Danielle?
Yeah, happy to jump in. As you can see, my philosophy is very much based on more of the ecosystem. So it's not just one element that feeds into all the others. You have to have them all working together. And so to support more women entrepreneurs, you need more women on the decision-making side. And what that looks like in the most early stages, it's more subjective because the founders have not had as much time to build out their metrics, both financial and strategic, to say, okay, we've proven this out. Now we're ready for Series A. What does that look like? So in the early stages where it's most subjective, that's where I see the opportunity for the most new perspective. And we're talking about innovation and disruption as well. So we need to see those perspectives come into play, not only from a women's standpoint, but from an intersectional lens, from a broad diversity lens. What does that look like to bring new emerging managers and their perspectives to the table so that they can raise the proper early stage capital necessary to build their own track records? And what does that model look like? Or maybe they have different models. There's been a lot more innovation in this early stage financing space in the US than in Canada, right? So does the typical VC model work for all companies? What about the other 95% of businesses? And what makes most sense for each region of Canada or type of founder? So all of that to say, different emerging managers can bring those perspectives and that representation. Early stage angels as well, the ones who have the high net worth capabilities to invest not only directly into companies, but into emerging managers. So by matching and supporting those early initiatives across Canada, I can see a lot more popping up and feeling like they can commit to this. And we want that talent. We want to unlock that talent from, wherever they're currently working into more venture capital and entrepreneurial and disruptive, innovative skills, because those are what are going to, I think, enable the Canadian economy in the long term.
Marielle?
So I think that the government role in funding is a very important role. And, we can see through the women's entrepreneurship strategy that these programs, that a lot of the programs that we mentioned today, the one that Danielle mentioned, the CVCA's program, it's fully bursaried. That can be a huge barrier financially. That can be a huge barrier. Especially at the beginning of your career, to put that much money towards upskilling. So that's an example of where the government is playing a role in providing funding, as well as the programs that I mentioned that NACO is deploying. And then hopefully the funding will continue. But even if it doesn't, what it's done is it sparked those programs and connections and that foundation. And hopefully these organizations can find a sustainable business model to continue this work, because we are still in the early stage of seeing the outcomes. But I attended a roundtable last week at Global Startups, and there are really meaningful connections being made and conversations being had. And then second is, I'm a former educator, and so my belief is that everything goes back to education. So when we're talking about systemic change, I think that there needs to be a mindset shift in education. And when we start early in changing that mindset, that is going to have the most powerful effect on change. And I'm feeling hopeful. I've been out of the system and the curriculum for over a decade, but I have two daughters, and they are 8 and 10, and I have never heard them talk about their gender as a barrier. They have never said, I can't do that because I'm not a boy, ever. It's not in their mindset. So I'm hoping that continues, and that's a positive signal.
Amazing. And it's as I said, it's encouraging to hear everybody has such hope and enthusiasm, especially coming out of COVID. I just Tracy has put a question in the Q&A. Maybe you could respond to. Somebody already typed an answer, so we don't need to ask Tracy's question anymore. I did want to note, and I don't want to embarrass her, but Tara Fraser is in the audience, and people here probably know she founded Iskew Air, but more excitingly for me, she's also building Eli Bird Aero, which is the first, or one of the first electric powered fleets of airlines and new technology. And I don't know, Tara, if you wanted to add any perspectives based on your experience in building your companies, and what you would like to see to help encourage women founders start up and scale up, but you're kind of an icon. There she is. Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's okay. I'm happy to be part of the conversation, and my ears perked right up when I heard my name there, and so thank you for all of that. Is there something specifically you'd like me to speak to?
Well, maybe just what you found in your journey, because you're such a trailblazer, and what you think needs to happen in order to allow more people to follow your path.
Thank you. A couple things that may be even only loosely connected, but connected. I think that one of the things we have to do more, and I'm not modeling this in any way, is talk more about how challenging it is, and how, we, especially with a safety related business, always really want to frame things in the most positive light, but it's very, very challenging. And for me, who is, to be an Indigenous woman, to be a woman in a very male-dominated industry, and to have the audacity of calling an airline Woman Air and then putting Indigenous words on the side of an airplane. There's a lot of repercussions of that, and people do want to hold me as a bit of an icon, but it's extraordinarily challenging to disrupt in this kind of industry. And in order to do that, I need nutrients. So I always talk about money as nutrients. And I wish I could attribute this learning to someone specific, because I didn't come up with it on my own. But, this idea that wherever the nutrients flow, that's what's thriving. And it's literally as simple as that. And if you, just like it is in nature, and if you have parts of nature or people or organizations that have been starved of nutrients or aren't receiving any nutrients, it's very simple. What gets the nutrients thrives, what doesn't get the nutrients dies. And we have to reduce the barriers as much as possible. And they are in every single place that you are trying to find your success. And I also think that we have to like I've found, especially recently, I've really isolated myself. I isolated myself from supports, from other people, from communities, and we have to find a way for that not to become a mechanism of survival. So I have no idea how that lands for anybody, but when you ask me those questions, what's in the way, it is always very simple. We need to flow the nutrients. That's what everyone is talking about here. That's what money is. And it has to be as low barrier and low bullshit as possible.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And apologies for putting you on the spot, but I was thrilled to engage. You joined us today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So we're pretty much out of time. Question, Ashley's asking how she can find a mentor in this space. And I know that the Women's Equity Lab was listed, but where would you start? I guess Marielle or Danielle, because you know the Canadian context.
You want me to go first, Danielle? Ashley, where are you located?
We don't know for sure.
So again, going back to geography, attending events, if I'm assuming if
Vancouver.
you're in Vancouver, okay.
So the Forum, Women Entrepreneurship Council, there are a number of organizations there, right?
Yeah, so start by attending events and making connections. That is, that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the best place to start. I'm not sure what the context is if you are an entrepreneur or have a business, and if you're planning on raising money, there are pitch competitions and other things that you can apply for. But just as a simple place to get started in making connections is try to get out to the events. There are a number of fantastic organizations across Canada that are very welcoming and open and collaborative. And, even if you're not an entrepreneur raising money, if you're even just thinking about entrepreneurship, you will be welcomed with open arms. So I would start there, and I'm sure Danielle has some great advice as well.
Thanks. Yeah, that's exactly where to start. You never know where you're going to find that right person for you, right? It's a very personal journey who your mentor is. I'll share the Canadian Women in Venture Capital group. Certainly a lot of younger women, sometimes that's helpful. Where I found my mentor was through a specific initiative for women in private equity. And so I still meet with who they matched me with, even though that program is long gone. So there's initiatives like that that'll pop up. Take advantage of them, apply, put yourself out there, because you may meet someone who you might not have ever connected with, even just more naturally, or ask like you are here, and someone will introduce you. So I guess that's an ask to the entire network. Maybe if you share your LinkedIn, Ashley, someone can connect you in. And then I would say from a broader network of investors and angels, we have our Elevate Women Plus programming, also funded by Women Entrepreneurship Strategy Funds. And so we have an angel mentorship model. So if there are individuals who want to get into investing directly and building that track record in VC, happy to loop you in there, and you can apply as a mentor, as a founder, or as an angel.
Thanks so much. And I think that's a great place to end. We will do a follow-up. We tape recorded the session. We'll include information about programs and supports that are available. Won't be comprehensive, but we'll include everything that's provided, and that will help Giovanna as well. And also, WEC has an Ask Give platform. You can go on and you can post a question, and someone will answer. So we'll make sure we put all of that together. I want to thank our three official panelists for taking time today to join us. And Tara, sorry for centering you out, but it's always such an inspiration to see you, because you are one of our very impressive success stories, and you've overcome so many barriers, not just as a woman, but as an Indigenous woman in a tech sector where women are almost invisible. So great place to end. And thank you, all of you, for joining in. And of course, thanks to the awesome WEC DI team for pulling this together, along with our other sponsors. Have a great day.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you very much.